Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We are super excited to dive into today's webinar, which is all about building your maintenance program in 2024. A couple of quick housekeeping items just before we dive in. Today's session is being recorded. This is so that we can share the presentation with you afterwards in case there's anything you want to revisit. You can also go ahead and submit your questions via text using the icon on your screen. We'll make sure to bring those up in the Q&A session at the end. And slides and resources are available for download. We'll also be sending a follow-up email with any resources that you may need. So jumping in, I'd love to introduce our panelists here. We have Matt Burtz, who is a maintenance consultant. Matt brings extensive experience in the agriculture and food production industries, growing his career from technician up to director of maintenance, and now working with a handful of different maintenance teams to help them optimize their maintenance program. We also have Skylar Rogers on the call here, who's been with Limble for about 3 years, working with the thousands of maintenance teams that we support to help them calm the chaos and build more efficient maintenance operations. My name is Luca, and I do product marketing here at Limble. I'm a big fan of annual planning and leveraging historical data to bring a comprehensive plan together. And so super, super excited to jump in here with all of you today. The first thing that we'd like to cover is what we call the digital maintenance maturity model. And why this is important is because when you're building a maintenance plan, really the first step is understanding where you and your organization are today. In order to determine where you want to go and what steps you need to take to get there, you have to really look at your current state. And so the digital maintenance maturity model really helps maintenance teams differentiate strategies that are right for them based on the technology that they're using today. And so we'll kind of take a look at what these stages look like. There are 4 stages in the model, starting off with manual, which is really pen and paper based. So you're probably doing primarily a run to failure reactive maintenance strategy, not a whole lot of tracking. Some things are tracked, via pen and paper. But not a whole lot of historical data, not really a centralized place for your maintenance work. Stage 2 is digital. And so this is kind of where you're moving that maintenance strategy into spreadsheets and getting a little bit more proactive, a little bit more preventive, potentially still mostly reactive. But you're starting to kind of plan out some of your maintenance tasks in spreadsheets and do a little bit more tracking. Stage 3 is what we call automated, and this is CMMS based. So this is when you really have a dedicated tool that is designed to help you manage all of the functions of your maintenance, from PMs to work orders to parts and reporting. And then stage 4, we call integrated. So this is when you have your CMMS and other potential tools like IoT sensors that are really helping you get predictive with your maintenance and optimize your PM schedules and work orders based on that real-time equipment data that's feeding from your IoT sensors into your CMMS. So this is kind of how we think about it. And as we dive into those maintenance plans, they'll really be tailored based on where you are on the digital maintenance maturity model. So as we kind of think about that next stage of this webinar, we'd love to get a sense of where you are today so we can make sure that we're really diving into that maintenance plan that's going to be most relevant to your current maintenance operation. If everybody could just take a quick moment to go ahead and participate in this poll that's on the screen here and help identify what stage of the digital maintenance maturity model you're in today. Like we have 1 submission, 7 submissions. I'll give everyone another minute here. All right, awesome. Great. So it looks like we have a lot of folks here that are using spreadsheets today, a handful of maintenance professionals that are kind of in that manual stage using pen and paper, some folks that are using CMMS, and then a segment of the audience that's kind of in between stages or not quite sure where they lie. And so with that, I will hand this over to Matt and Skylar. Take it away with the annual maintenance plan for those pen, paper, and spreadsheet pages of our DMM.
Perfect. Thank you, Luke. I really appreciate that. Yeah, definitely. If we're in that stage 1 or 2, I think that the first thing that's really healthy to do is start asking some questions, right, about really our current process and what potential gaps are. I know that especially in that stage 1 where we're very manual, pen and paper, or maybe even have a spreadsheet here or there, it can probably seem overwhelming sometimes, right? A lot of customers I've talked to, well, I can make a list of 20 things that we need to do. Well, we really want to simplify the process and, create that bullet list of those 2 or 3 big wins that are going to have the largest impact in your organization, such as if I'm on pen and paper, maybe getting that work request portal or a work order system put in place is going to be the biggest effective lift that I can do out the gate. Then we can crawl, walk, run into other things. Definitely a process here, and it does take time. One thing to note throughout this entire presentation, this step 1 of goal setting, I don't think ever goes away, no matter which phase of maintenance you're in, right? We could be beginning on paper and pen, or we could be in the advanced stages where we're connecting CMMSs to other technologies, streamlining processes. We're always going to want to take this step at the beginning of the year and set these goals. And I'd love for Matt to chime in and let us know, Matt, what was your process when you went through these steps in the early phases of your maintenance?
Great question, Skylar, and excited to be here with all of you guys today. The poll, I think it's really going to go well here, give us good direction what we got going. But, for me starting out, number one, I didn't know what questions to ask. I knew that when I worked at Preferred Popcorn, we had a new plant. I want to set the stage here so everybody knows we had a new plant and we had new processes. And so with everything new, we were trying to figure out which direction do we go. And so we were asking these questions of where do I start? How do I make sure I stay on this? New runs, but only for so long. And we need to figure out some patterns. We'll talk about historical data in a little bit, but so we knew that we had some pen and paper things that we were having trouble making the connections with. We knew that we wanted to establish good PM programs. And I always talk about in my extensive webinars about doing my one spreadsheet. I'm like, I got this one piece of equipment. I'm going to make one spreadsheet and we're going to go out and do this PM. And after I looked at that spreadsheet, I went, what am I going to do with it now? So it was very quick for me to make that transition of going from pen and paper to spreadsheet to I need something bigger. I need something greater. And I spent a lot of years with John Deere and knew that I needed a software program to make that transition. Or for me as the new guy coming in, a CMMS. What is a CMMS? And for me, I figured out really quickly that this is the maintenance software that I needed to achieve the level of success that we were looking at, just by asking some of these simple questions. It's not that you have to jump into the spreadsheets and then make the step into CMMS. It's not a linear process, but you can actually make that step from step 1 to step 3 really easy. So identifying these important questions, real simple, see what these questions take you, and then trying to set some goals and not make it too big for yourself. Don't get overwhelmed. Take one thing, start with that, and we'll elaborate on that as we go through here.
Absolutely. Thank you for the feedback on that. And then we also have another poll because we want to definitely engage with our audience today here on what your biggest priorities are, right? If you're in specifically that stage 1 or 2 pen and paper spreadsheets, and you're looking to make that top 1, 2, or 3 goal for the next year, if we can start by throwing out some answers here. Is it to track work orders and maintenance tickets, reduce equipment downtime? Feel free to start submitting these. Kind of interested what the audience has goals for that. Automate PM scheduling, streamline communications, organize parts inventory, monitor key maintenance metrics. I mean, that could be a really big one I see here too, right? If we're a pen and paper and spreadsheets, metrics are probably pretty hard for us to dig up. I'm sure that with there's a will, there's a way, but then we have to look at, are those metrics accurate? Can we trust them to make business decisions, which we'll talk about a little later on, and the poll as well. And then even stay audit ready, right? Again, I think that has to do a lot with that the historical data access. And I've
that
definitely
was huge for us in the food and bev industry on that audit one. That was for us. It was a huge one.
In that food and beverage industry, where did you start at the stage? Were you at like a stage 1 or 2, or was that more of already in advanced inventory?
Because of how quickly the plant progressed, we were kind of a stage 1 and 2. The operation grew exponentially in a matter of a couple of years. And so with that, we needed to make sure our maintenance program was tracking right along with that. The company had great grades. Everything was going great. And we just wanted to make sure we didn't lose that, stay ahead of it.
Perfect. Love that. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at these submissions. We got about close to half of you decided to fill that out. So looks like tracking work orders and maintenance tickets. Again, yeah, that makes a lot of sense if you're in that first 1 or 2 step, just being able to organize putting out those fires, right? I always look at that as like the squeaky wheel phase. There's so much going on. If it's not a massive issue put in front of you, you really don't have the time and sometimes feel like you have the resources. Reducing downtime, huge there. Automate PM scheduling. Definitely. So a healthy mix of a lot of those, but those top 3 and 4 definitely seem to hit home. So once you identify those, like you were saying, Matt, asking the questions is the biggest part, and taking away, what do we want to work on? Sometimes it's hard to even know where to start there. Then really the next phase that you would be looking at is testing the solutions. Okay, so we know we have a goal here. We know we're manual, we're pen and paper. How do we start advancing through this next year and achieving those goals, right? So creating that short list, we definitely, in my experience, I've seen people go down the spreadsheet route before getting into the CMMS, but I'm just curious, Matt, what specifically was your spreadsheet experience like?
like I alluded, I did one single spreadsheet, and I'm no Excel master, so that might be part of it. But for me, going through a spreadsheet was, I made one spreadsheet. I was going to do a PM on our dust collector. Went through the manual, organized a PM, and then I took this piece of paper and I checked all the boxes, made my notes, and I said, what am I going to do with it now? How can this be actionable? Because the next step for me then was to take this piece of paper and put it in a folder in a file cabinet that was just going to collect more papers. And were we ever going to need to pull out that paper? And who was going to even know that it was there? These were some of we talk about questions, asking ourselves questions about the process. And these were what I was beginning to come up in my mind. And they're actionable questions. And so very quickly, I walked into my general manager's office. He's right across the hall. We had an awesome relationship. And I said, Sam, what am I going to do with this? And he says, that's a great question. So he's like, we need some software to help us figure this out. And so it was very easy for us to begin to make that process change. And as far as testing our actions, I moved into, I need a CMMS, and I started with, I just grabbed one. I Googled best CMMS software out there. And this was several years ago. And I grabbed one of them and I went through it and I'm like, I like it, but it's really short here. So let's check the next one. I did the next one. I'm like, okay, this one's really strong where this one was weak, but all the scales completely flipped. And as I was going through that, I came up with a testing process that I want to pass on to you guys. Start with one piece of equipment that is critical to your operation or you know really well. Take it through the actions here of setting it up, doing a work order, doing a PM, recalling that information later on. And then as you go through that, you will begin to find what is important to you. What do you want to develop from that? And so I think Skylar's going to feed right into that here, going into this next slide of we've done these tests. Now let's evaluate it. Does it match what we need? Do we need more? Do we need less?
Exactly. Yeah, and taking those goals right from the first slide we were talking about, or essentially your biggest business problems, feeding that through a testing environment to CMMSs. I mean, most reputable CMMS companies are going to have some sort of test environment. So don't just try one, try many. See which ones drill down to your specific answers that you need for your business. And then from there, when you select your solution, what is the criteria? You know, you may have more than one that answer those few problems that you're looking to solve, essentially. One of the things to look forward to, though, is maybe make sure that that solution can grow with you as well when you're testing these out. After those three, if I'm on like a stage 1 or stage 2 and I eventually want to get to that stage 4 or beyond of maintenance, can this software grow with me? Some great criteria there. Is it easy to use? That's a really big one that I hear all the time. A lot of people jump into a solution just because it checks every box, think it's right for them. But maybe we're a little short on this selecting the solution and testing, right? They didn't let their team put it in their hands, making sure that it's easy for them to use, making sure that it's mobile friendly. And I think that will really help you push this up the ladder to management. What was your approval process like, Matt, when you finally found your solution that you wanted to select? And
so we went through, you know, and like Skylar said here on these first few, these were two of my big ones. Number one, it had to be easy to use. In my testing process, you know, that last slide, the testing part of it is the mechanics, the bare bones. How does it function? And then after I've tested the function of it, how well does it flow? Does this match? What's important? And for me, ease of use. It had to be easy. I tried a CMMS program out there that had all the like it was customizable in all the ways that I wanted it. But I about had to be a software engineer to figure out how to run it. I couldn't waste my time with something of that nature. And for me, I was just as much of a mechanic as I was a maintenance director or technician. And so I was out fixing stuff on the floor, but I didn't want to be carrying my laptop with me to go through and do some of these things. So it had to be mobile. The mobile app had to be solid. And so that was a key feature for me as well, because I needed to go out to that piece of equipment to gather all of the data because I didn't have all the data at hand. And so for me, that was a huge piece of it as well. And then moving into the approval process of it, again, I was blessed. I had a great relationship with my GM, and I don't take that lightly. But for me, it was a matter of he understood what we needed. He said, we are firefighters. We want to move into fire prevention. How can we do that? It was a great question. And so for me, it was a relatively easy sell of like, I've got it. This is the program. This is what I need. And he's like, good, take it, run with it. Let's go with it.
Perfect. And did you feel like at that point you guys understood that return on investment of time, not just financially, but time? Like, hey, if we take the time to develop this, take the leap into a solution, the benefits definitely outweigh the growing pains. Because I know a lot of people stuck in that one or two go, well, I know we need to do it, but it just seems like a pain, and I'm not sure if it's worth growing through that. Did you find like it was worth it for you and your team? And how quick?
Oh, absolutely. And I had another piece of it too. I was working with our food safety coordinator, and he was on board. He's like, we can streamline a lot of this. I got transparency. He was like, what do I need to do to help? And so, you know, I had other departments that were a relatively easy sell that made this whole thing move forward. And so we worked together on a lot of it, a lot of the development of what information does he need to track? What information do I need to track? And how can we bring that together to be a one-stop shop for all of the information? And so making the sale of it was not hard for us because the return on investment, we didn't realize how much time actually we were going to end up saving. We weren't scouring emails. We weren't looking for anything lost in emails. Anything that he wanted us to do right away was put at the top, and we set it up that way, and it got done. Stuff wasn't falling through the cracks. Stuff was done in a timely manner instead of, and I don't want to paint that as things weren't bad, but we definitely knew we needed to make improvement. So it was just an awesome transition for all of us to be able to take it to the next level that it needed to be at.
Perfect. Yeah. And after you select, What was that, Luca? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a really great call out there as well that you tied in your conversation with leadership really to those larger, higher level organization goals, right? Like you had the goals for yourself as well of being more efficient, not getting stuck in the weeds, maximizing wrench time, not manually kind of managing this. But there was this higher level goal that the organization had to become preventive, to stop, I think you said, stop fighting fires and become fire preventers, right? And I think that's something that's super important in terms of getting buy-in from the leadership team is making sure that you're thinking about the larger org and the company's bottom line and what you're really trying to move towards as an organization, and really speaking to that when you're presenting the solution. Matt, it sounds like you and your leader were super tightly aligned on that kind of from the beginning.
Yeah, and I was basically given, take it, see what you can do with it, and let's grow it and see what happens. We certainly weren't out any time investing into it by any means. So it was definitely, we had some days that we were deep into the weeds on trying to make sure it was going. But overall, we had a great buy-in, and it really, really helped the process of getting other departments online to truly make it what it is today.
That's perfect. And then when it comes down to the actual, the step 4 of executing this plan, and you've already alluded to this as well, and I can speak from my experience from doing so many implementations, especially someone that's on pen and paper or maybe spreadsheets even, it can be a little overwhelming of like, hey, we have all of this info we need to go collect. We need to set everything up, our PMs, our work order templates. Well, make it easy on yourself, right? Start with those critical assets. If that's all you have, or if it even boils down to manually putting a few of those in to get you off the ground to help, be a better firefighter and be able to track everything in one place, then start there, right? Compartmentalize these steps. And actually that bleeds off a lot into making it easier to even train on the system. Because now our technicians at least know how to go in there, look up an asset on that chosen system. They can create a work order, complete it, and walk or crawl, walk, run, right? Now the PMs start trickling in. They're more confident about using that system because they've already submitted work orders, completed it, know how to log their time. Is that the approach that you guys took, Matt, when you ended up implementing your systems?
Yeah, so we took our I took those that would have the most buy-in, those that were the most on board. So already my GM and my food safety coordinator were part of my team. And we had meetings that we would actually get together and talk about how it was going to work on his side, because he had to work on policy changes on their end for paperwork. And we talked about how it was going to work on our side. We really developed, like, what do you need to track? Like for us, talking about priorities, further back, one of them was asking them, what information do you want to keep track of? How do you want this to look? And so that was back to the bare bones of testing. Okay, let's build this process. You review it. Do you think it's going to work? And it was up to us as the technicians to go out and test and make sure that it worked. And then ultimately the rollout part of it, I grabbed the guys that I knew would take it serious, the guys that I knew that could provide me positive feedback. And and I knew that they would also provide me critical feedback as well, of, hey, this works, hey, this doesn't, maybe do something different here, which was what I needed. I needed feedback from both sides. And then know your audience, know who you're going to roll this out to. If you have guys out there, and we know who these people are, that don't have a strong buy-in to this type of thing. Not that you shouldn't use them, but roll out this program with those that you know are going to take it effectively and seriously, and that will provide you effective, serious information back to you, and still incorporate those people. Teach them how to do simple things like submit work requests, because that's critical to your operation. If they can at least send you a work request, that could save you a ton of headache and paperwork down the road as well. That was what I did. I had everybody trained by the time I was done, but everybody was trained to a different level that they wanted to learn. They have to want it. They have to want to be part of it. And at the end of it, I had everybody wanting to be a part of it in different levels. And as they wanted to learn and grow more, I grew that for them.
Yeah. And for the most part, when working with companies that are in that one or two, they're surprisingly excited, a lot of them, to get going on this because this does make their job in life a lot easier. It reduces a lot of stress, a lot of, hey, where's that? Where's this? Puts everything in one spot, saves them a lot of time, right? Did you find that most of them were willing to jump into a system because it did so much for their day-to-day operations at a technician level?
Yeah, my techs and everybody were more than willing to jump in on it, and it required me to know how to meet each one of them individually. I was a maintenance director, but I was also training them in what I had learned, and so it required patience on my part to make sure that everybody got into it. And as everybody got into it, it continued to grow from there because everybody saw that this was actually going somewhere. It actually had weight, it had value, because those guys that were, all they did was just submit a work request. Now they saw that their work was being done. They felt like they were taken seriously. Even if they were part of the production team, not maintenance, they felt like they had a voice. They had a say in the culture of the product. And we began to create a culture around maintenance of how do we make this work? How do we keep equipment running? And because we were building an internal culture, we saw an attitude change towards maintenance. People were more proactive about, hey, something sounds wrong, something smells weird, something vibrates differently than it used to. I got more work requests. And because people were submitting work requests, hey, I want to be part of that too. They were jumping in on that as well.
That's perfect. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? And to overview that, there's two parts really of looking at this adoption. One is the actual technical piece, right? Getting the tools in the hands of the right people, making it user friendly, making sure it's the right tool, having a good plan of execution for those larger goals that you've established earlier in that step one. Along with that is the adoption as like a whole nother piece, right? The human element to it. And I feel like if you listen to the human element as you go through each of these steps, they harmonize very well, right? An example of that is if you're testing your solution, but you're not letting some of your technicians give you the feedback on workflows and if they would use it, well, then you're shorting yourself at the end of the day. So that is really good to know. And again, the biggest thing for the stage 1 and 2, if you're in that stage of maintenance, is really to put a plan together to get into digitized maintenance and have those business issues in front of you, because that's going to help keep you focused and compartmentalize your journey from start to finish. It really makes it easy, right? So after that step 1 or 2, we've gone from pen and paper. Now we want to move into more of a digital space. We've selected a CMMS, and how do we get better from there, right? This is really, I feel like, where it gets good and you really get more into advanced maintenance. And I think one of the biggest reasons here is because you have historical data, right? In 1 and 2, you probably have a harder time accessing that type of information. Seeing what your downtime even is could be a goal if you're at 1 and 2, right? Knowing how many work orders or PMs that you'd miss out on, you may not even know that. Well, jumping into more of this phase 3 and 4, now you have historical data to go back and review. So this year I go back, I look at 2023, and I have a data field where I can say, what can we do better, right? Do we need to optimize our PMs? Can we make parts better? Where are the biggest lifts here based off the data we're seeing? And what was your experience really with this stage and jumping into your historical data, Matt?
So we were able to go back, it was awesome to see the data come together, and with the things that were out there, we were able to go back and start reviewing PMs, for instance. PMs was a big one for us, developing how do we put things together? How do we make things work? And books will tell you how often to do PMs. These PMs need to be done so many days, so many hours, so many miles, different pieces of that. But one of the biggest things I want to take away from this, though, too, is I'm an aviation buff, but during World War II, there was a study done on a lot of the aircraft crashes that happened, and they found that a majority of them happened post-maintenance. Things were left loose, things were taken apart. And some of the questions that arose from that is, are we PMing this too often? Are we digging too deep into our PMs? And I started to ask myself that question of, do I need to PM this many times? For instance, we had a machine that required the bolts to be checked, the torque of the bolt to be checked every so often. And history began to reveal that every time we went to check them, they didn't move. They were tight. They weren't loose. Now, that doesn't mean we don't ever check them, but maybe we could reduce the frequency. And if we reduce the frequency of how often we're having to either shut this piece of equipment down or try to get into it, we could spend our time in other areas that were more requiring or more demanding of our attention. And so when you hit this point of you have gotten things into a CMMS, you're actually functioning out of a CMMS, it's important to go back and review our procedures. Are our work orders too complex? Are our PMs too complex? Are we doing this too often? Do I have all of the assets in here that I actually want to track? And so some of it just comes back to like what we talked about in the first slide of reviewing everything these basic questions. Am I still hitting these goals? Am I still hitting the marks here? Right. Or did I rabbit trail into something I don't need to spend my time with? Parts organization was huge for us because we had a lot of parts in different locations, and it was hard for us. There was a time during COVID, I'm sure a lot of us remember, that next day air meant sometime this week, maybe. And so if we didn't have these parts on hand, it would cost us money. Breakdowns cost us twice, right? Right. They cost us because we're spending time and money to fix it, but we're also not in production at the same time. At least that was my industry that we were in. So getting a good review of that data to know, are we wasting time and money in areas we shouldn't, was something that was becoming prevalent to us. We were servicing things too often. So you could start watching things that way. Parts inventory, we were able to make sure we kept things on hand that we needed. So.
Yeah, critical pieces there, right? In reviewing that, do we have enough in stock? Are we still running out, even though we set up minimum thresholds for those parts? Can we make adjustments on that? Did that affect any downtime, right? So you finally have the data to really dive into that. And if I'm in a stage 3, and especially if it's a production environment, well, maybe I want to take that to the next level. And maybe some of these PMs I've done time-based, they're weekly, daily, monthly. Maybe I can start switching those and using sensor technology to run off cycles, right? Or run off an hours based or thresholds of heat. You had talked, Matt, earlier. I know we've talked about you being in food production, and how critical would that be to be able to have that sensor feeding that data in?
Yeah, especially for those of you that have temperature monitored things. We hadn't hit IoT yet when I was there. But it was certainly on the horizon. We had manual processes that would trigger other PMs. We would go out and we would physically read the hour meter or physically read the odometer in something and input it, and then Limble could generate me a PM, if it met a certain threshold. But I was really wanting to find a way to automate that with some of our line and some of our integrations, with counters. What I started to hit earlier was with temperature sensors. If we have a cooler, for instance, and it has to be kept at a certain temperature. Number one, I want to be alerted if that temperature starts rising for any reason. But also that can begin to provide us feedback of, hey, we need to do some predictive maintenance on this. Hey, these temperatures are running warmer than they usually do. Maybe it's on an engine or something of that nature. Or a compressor. And so maybe this is telling me that we are on the precipice of failure, and we should try to catch this before it dies. We don't want to be in reactive mode of, oh no, it's dead, now what? We want to try to keep that seamless for production. So they have no idea what's going on. They're there day to day, they're running their baggers, that whatever it is that they're doing, they don't know that you're present and that things have failed because you've done your job and other ways are still running.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, the biggest thing that's step one to take away, right, is review that historical data set benchmarks based off that historical data, right? And that's going to help create those goals. Again, just like when we started talking about even the phase 1 and 2, that really never stops. It's always going to help you progress into that next phase of maintenance, no matter really where you're at in maintenance. So I'm curious, again, a little more interaction from the audience. What is everybody's biggest priorities in 2024 if we're really at that more of stage 3 or 4, right? I like to almost call that more of like a fine-tuning stage, which is an exciting stage to be in. It's like the payoff of making it through that first couple stages and getting digital. So again, is it tracking work orders and maintenance tickets, reducing downtime, automating your PM schedules? Like I said, maybe we're taking them off time and doing hours, miles-based PM, really reorganizing that parts inventory, streamlining communications. Maybe we need to start breaking up task assignments by teams, making it more efficient, more people with more clarity on who's doing what, or overall do better on key maintenance metrics too, right? Because now we actually have the data, definitely. And that's, of course, the audit thing on almost any regulatory need is going to be huge. So I'll give you guys a few minutes, especially if you're in that stage 3 or 4. I'd love to hear, really where do you see going in 2024 as far as those steps?
And one thing too, I want to hit on here. I mean, if it were me, I'd be checking all the boxes. I know that, but
right.
Try to get down to 1 or 2 if we possibly can. But I want you guys to also think about, as you're answering this, or if you've already answered it, how much, here's a question to ask yourself. If I take care of category D, if I organize my parts inventory, how much will that help me with category B of reducing equipment downtime?
Exactly.
Do I have the parts on hand that I need to have on hand? And at the critical timing of making that happen. Can we stock a whole other assembly line on the shelf? No. But there are ways to reduce that time with that.
It's perfect. Yeah, I love to hear that. I'm curious if, the stage 1 and 2 and the difference between a 3 and 4, maybe someone that's a little more advanced, what the priorities are. So we'll go ahead and flip to the results so everyone can see. Really reduce equipment downtime, of course, is going to be huge. And I mean, you can really drill into that, right? Like now we have the data of going into there, and this is a perfect segue of the next step, really, right? We're going to take that of reducing equipment downtime, and we're going to use that in our goal setting, right? So, okay, that equipment downtime, which is interesting, the audience really spoke out very loud about that, or boosting productivity. Well, how do we approach that, right? That's very vague. Okay, I know I want to cut downtime, but how? Well, now I'm in a stage 3 or 4. I have some tools, right? If you're in a CMMS, you should have some ways of generating digital reports, right? You'll be able to go in there and start creating reports for downtime events, hours by technician, percent completion. We really can review the data and see where our shortfalls are that are affecting the downtime. Did you end up doing this with your downtime goals as well, Matt?
Yeah, so we were, one of the biggest one that stuck out to me was we had kind of after a year of going, okay, where are we at and how's this working? Kind of reviewing our processes. I remember my GM telling me one day, he says, it is clear that this is working. I said, based off of what? He says, we weren't shut down for a single day longer than 24 hours in the last calendar year. Perfect. We had breakdowns. We had things that we needed to take care of, and that's going to happen. That's why we have jobs, right? That's why we're in maintenance, is to keep it from breaking. Fix it, but don't spend any money, right? And so we went back and we started asking ourselves the questions. Remember, it's all about asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask them of why are we working? Why are we running? It's the opposite, right? Instead of going, why did this break? Why is this still running? And so some of that just included going back and reviewing how much money was spent on some of the assets, how much did we spend on parts? And for us, it's kind of crazy because we talk about, well, this machine's broken, it's costing me, but it's that second piece of that that's really costing us, is because we are not in production. And so what were we able to do? we were actually spending more. I remember having a conversation with finance because they were concerned about how much we were spending in parts. But our GM also came back and he said, no, he says, we are actually doing really well here because we're not down. And because we're not down, it's not costing us in all of these other departments. And so it really, that was the analyzation that we had taken it to of, yes, the maintenance department is always that one area of the budget they want to cut because they see it as a flat out expense. But when you really dig down in the nuts and bolts, we're spending more in maintenance, but what is that profit margin really looking like on the backside? And I think that that's one of the metrics that you really got to look at of, you don't want to get carried away. You can't stock a whole another machine on the shelf, but making sure that you are investing in critical parts. I spent time with our engineering company, making sure that I stocked what they told me to stock and had a good relationship with them. And so it was, a lot of it was relationship based. If you guys are hearing this with me, it requires a good relationship with your vendors. It requires a good relationship with those that you're working with, and understanding, working together with that. So
absolutely. And I love that, like for that example, you had a goal of not having breakdowns that were 24 hours long, right? That caused downtime. Just like in the example here, maybe I had 5 or 6 events that took us down for a day or more. Well, next year, how can we adjust the PM schedules? How can we adjust our maintenance so we can cut that in half or better, right? So that's a great example of one of those goals of cutting those downtime. And then once you have those goals in front of you based off the data, you can then put a plan of action together, right? And that's where we can say, okay, I may have this piece of equipment. Again, I love using this of time-based that I want to switch to a cycle base, or maybe I need to PM less, which I thought was very interesting that was one of your experience. You were over maintenancing equipment. You were able to cut that back. That freed up more of your technicians' time, so they had more coverage, right? So this is where you can start considering, hey, what are the solutions to our problems here, right? Are we ready to put in IoT sensors to feed the data because the payoff of going through that is going to be reducing and cutting downtime? Or is that going to boost productivity even, right? I have sensor data feeding into my asset fields. Now I don't need technicians going there once a day, updating hours or cycles or any of that manually. I'm starting to automate processes. Even if you're really advanced into your maintenance, how can we start connecting softwares and streamlining departments together? That's a whole nother discussion there as well that can really save not only the maintenance department time, but maybe finance, maybe quality, all of those other conjoining departments may be able to get behind that. And that's a whole company boost of productivity, right? Inventory, I can't stress it enough. That's a really big one too there, of identifying, what is cost effective. What are we overnighting? Are we still overnighting parts? Well, let's change the minimum thresholds on that. Let's get other vendors. I love that you touched, Matt, on the relationships too, right? That's going to be really big and help you in some of these.
Absolutely.
Things. So
and one thing, if I may, while we're here, and to elaborate on what you're saying, Skylar, and I've kind of, while you've been talking here, I've been listening with one ear and reading with another eye, just scrolling through the Q&A, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I feel like it fits really well here. A lot of people seem to be concerned about collecting the proper data. And right. I want to touch on that just for a minute while we're here, because I think that this is critical. One of the main reasons, and I'm putting in a plug, but one of the main reasons I selected Limble was because I could collect everything that I wanted to collect as far as data. And even if there wasn't a way, I should say, I was able to catch 95% of it. Let me just put a small margin in there. But if there wasn't a way for me to capture exactly what I wanted, we came up with a workaround for it. Because work requests, I could customize the work requests to be what I wanted them to be. So I got the feedback as the maintenance director that I needed to know who was submitting it, why was it submitted, what's broke down. And this is a whole nother topic we could get into, but these guys are asking about how do I cut downtime and boost productivity? Capture the data that's important to you. And I think that's one of the things I loved about Limble was the customization piece of I could capture what I wanted. Our food safety guy, he could come in and, he could capture the signatures that he needed for food safety. This is signed off as safe. And we started beginning to ask, how could we actually take our CMMS program and incorporate it into other departments? Could our grain quality team actually use it to capture the data that they needed to? Could our production team actually take it and use it for information that they needed as well? And it all comes into that cutting downtime part. It all comes into that boosting productivity and reducing inventory costs, because our production team maybe could manage the quantity of bags that they have on hand and where those bags are stored. And so I think that there's multiple facets that a person could use in creating this plan of action of interdepartmental relationship. We started with that one piece of equipment, right? And for me, we built it from there, and I built it with the maintenance team and then the food quality team. And then we were beginning to see a vision for where it could go into the future.
Perfect. I love that. And then that even flows into our next piece, which is kind of the last, putting the rubber to the road, right? And executing. A few things that I may want to go off tangent here on is I think it's also important to have a strong partnership with this step in any phase, right? If I'm on phase 2 trying to get into phase 3 or phase 3 trying to advance into, more of automated processes, who is your partner with that, right? You were lucky enough to find Limble. We definitely take our customers by the hand, walk them through the entire process. Just because you were out of the base implementation stages doesn't mean that we kind of left you high and dry. So to be able to go back to the drawing board over and over again as much as you need and have a soundboard and people that are there to support you, how big of an impact did that have on you?
Huge. The service is, if you don't have service, the product is only as good as until the product wears out. And I think that's one of the things that I loved about everybody that I talked to when I was working with Limble was the answers that I got were timely, very timely in some cases. And ideas for workarounds are, hey, that's a great idea. Let's put that on the project board. And they have a project board. You can go out and you can vote on which project. I'm assuming that's still there, Skylar.
Absolutely.
But you can go out and you can say, hey, I think this is a great priority. Go after this next. So they're always dreaming. They're looking at that next step. And so we had a lot of support. If there was something I didn't know how to do or I had an idea for it, chances are somebody could walk me through the steps that I needed to know. Because you start with a blank slate. You're given the chalkboard. Boom, I got a CMMS. Now what? And so you take that one asset and you start building it out. Learn the flow of the program. Learn the flow of the CMMS. What can I do here? What can I not do here? And as you begin to get comfortable, ideas will come to you of how to take it to the next step.
Yep, absolutely. And that just brought it up because on this slide, as you can see, determine how often you want to check in for your success, I think is important as well as setting any goals, right? And so that's where that partner can come in. And, in this case, it was Limble with you. If we want to meet every month, every few weeks, where are we judging our success and when do we need to make adjustments, right? Because we're not always just going to go in here and say, yep, I have a plan. This is going to work. Reduce downtime by 50%. Boom. Hit it out of the park first try. We may need to iterate things as we go. So I think that's what's really nice of having that partner and being able to check in there. And then, of course, alignment on the execution, right? Is the leadership on board with all of the goals? Is the maintenance team on board with all of the goals? Are we seeing the same vision? I think that is extremely important. So everyone's pushing in the same direction, especially when we're getting more advanced into our maintenance plan. And yes, we have the data and we're doing good, but we want to do great, right? So final piece there. I mean, what would be your one biggest piece of advice you would give out there to them at getting started?
Great question. The biggest thing that I could say is, one of the things that I struggled with at the beginning was not knowing what questions to ask. And that can be a challenge. And that's hard because you don't know what you need to know, right? And if there's anything I could tell you guys to do, I know that we packed a ton of information into this slide deck. take some time. I believe we're sending it out when we're done here, but take some time and go back and review the slide deck from the day. Listen to our conversation again if you need to, and reach out to a sales rep or somebody with Limble. But ultimately start asking yourself those questions. Those are freebies. I mean, start asking yourself some of those guiding questions about what is important to me. And then the other piece of that is be willing to pivot. I thought that QR codes for us was going to be the be all end all. I'm going to put a sticker on everything. Everything's going to be QR coded. And I got to have it. Well, as I started in with Limble, I knew that they could do it. But it was one area for me, I found I didn't need to spend my time on. Not to say that we wouldn't have gotten there eventually, and I think that it definitely has its place, but I was willing to let that go because I found areas that were actually more important that I needed to spend my time in. So be willing to pivot if you need to, and start asking yourself some of those questions. I'm here to help if I can help with some of that, but don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that is probably one of the biggest things that I could tell you.
I love
and
that, man.
Get connected. Get your engineers in, get your vendors in, start asking questions.
Perfect. I really appreciate that, Matt. Thank you. And yeah, that again, that's pretty much everything that we had to go through today as far as the maintenance stages and plans for, 1 through 4 there. So now I'd just like to open it up with the last few minutes to some Q&A, and we'll get to these questions. If you want to, Luca, you can quarterback those out and we can answer them.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Skylar. And thank you, Matt. This has been so insightful. So I'll start off. We've got kind of a high level question in here from Paul, trying to understand how Limble compares to other similar CMMS platforms. And I think this is a great question, just kind of starting at the top, and then we'll get into some more specific questions that have come in. And I'll give kind of my 2 cents and then hand it over to the team here. But I think where Limble really differentiates is striking that balance of customizability and ease of use. A lot of the time you kind of see CMMS platforms falling on one end of the spectrum where they're really easy to use, but it's very much like templated, plug and play, you get what you get, and that's what makes it so easy to use. On the other side of the spectrum, you have very highly customizable, more complex platforms, but we see a little bit more difficulty getting adoption from technicians and getting the team to really learn it because it's a little bit more complex to use. And Limble really accomplishes both. It can be as simple and straightforward as you want it to be, and it can be as customizable as you need it to be. I would love to hear from Skylar and Matt kind of about how you would say Limble compares to other platforms in the space.
Yeah, I would definitely say that we are one of the top ones out there if you do your own research on it. Where we separate ourselves, one, again, I love how you just put that, Luca. We are in that gray area of functionality and ease of use, but also the support and team behind it. I mean, I have to be biased, of course, to that a little bit because, I work with Limble here and it's an amazing team, but being a part of that support and watching what our customers experience from growth from A to Z, I really can confidently say it's the company and the people that are brought to the table that you get to work with every day. That's really where I feel like we separate there. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I went through 6 or 7 of them, and each company I talked to somebody on the phone. I was doing the trial process, and I felt like when I got to Limble, that's where it really came together for me. And I can totally understand where Luke is coming from. Some of them I tried. Like I said, literally, you about got to be a maintenance software engineer and almost to use them. I like to use the word intuitive. Like you have to. Is it app based? Can my mind flow easily from one channel to the next? Is it simple to use? If there's anything that I've learned, if it's not simple, generally people don't have the attention span to try to buy into it or figure it out, and they will move on to the next thing. I think you see that across a lot of media platforms out there of how quickly we move from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think that maintenance software has to be the same way. You have to you have to want to be in it, but it has to draw you into it. And I think I felt like Limble did that for me because it was almost as if it was, I don't know who was in charge of who, but it was a good relationship. And the people that I worked with were always phenomenal. I was always great with the smile, great question. Everybody was excited to help me. So I felt like that was really important as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt.
Great. We've got a few minutes left here, so I'll jump into one more. Philip asked, what does it look like switching from production plant maintenance to campus facilities maintenance as a whole in terms of CMMS customization? Which I think is a great question because we do serve so many different industries, really kind of spanning that campus facilities to production plant. So I'd love to hear from the team what that looks like in a CMMS.
So yeah, we walked through that because we actually were expanding to a second location while we were building our CMMS. So it played right into it. It was relatively easy because I had already come up with my processes for our packaging plant. And so I already had a pretty good idea of the data that I wanted to capture and the data that I wanted to build. My process was simply start with adding assets. For most part, what do we need when we need parts, right? Something breaks. What's one of the first questions they ask? Well, what's the model number? What's the serial number? What's the manufacturing date? Those things were easily and readily accessed. So anytime I hopped on the phone, boom, I already had it in my hand. And so I just took that same process that I went from a production plant that we had into our next production plant. It was a different type of production, but it's equipment, right? It's nuts and bolts. It's product, model, make, serial number, all of that information. And I was able to start building that out as well and putting that all into the CMMS.
Perfect.
Great.
Couldn't answer it better myself.
No, you could have. You probably could have.
Perfect. We've got one from Chris here. We have multiple sites and multiple pieces of the same equipment. We need to be confident in organizing parent and child assets. I know that's something that's really core to Limble's functionality. So I'd love to hear a little bit from the team on what that looks like and how our teams use it.
I know with Limble specifically, right, assets are specific to a location. So it's great. We can make those sites separate locations. And even if we have a lot of the same type of assets, we'll probably help guide you make some unique identifiers. So let's say if I have 15 skid steers that are all cats, right? I probably want to make unique identifiers so I know, one, it'll automatically separate the location, and two, separate which one of the same asset I'm looking at. So it's a pretty straightforward process. Again, that just comes with working with us and some of those best practices that our customer success team can teach you.
Cool. I think we've got time for one more. Paul here asked, no mention of setting up criticality register as part of the CMMS development. To my mind, that's key to maintenance prioritization, spare parts inventory, reporting, and so on. Thoughts?
Paul, I want to hit on that one. You got me excited when I saw that one there because I think that there actually is a lot that a person can do when you develop your CMMS. I think when I talk about my one piece of equipment, I want to just clarify on something. For me, that one piece of equipment was a belt conveyor. And you might go, oh, it's just a belt conveyor. Who cares? But that one belt conveyor had the job of taking it from the grain bin to the truck, which took it to the plant. And if I wasn't getting popcorn to the plant, I was in trouble. And so we had multiple conveyors, but that was the piece that I knew really well. That was a critical piece for me. And I think you bring up a great point of, for me, it was a combo. But I want you guys to think about when you are developing your CMMS, if you decide to make the leap or if you're already in the leap, really focus on those critical pieces first. If this piece cannot fail on me because it is going to cost me greatly, certainly by all means start with doing that. And I just thinking about through, you definitely want to take and you want to add, make sure that your spare parts are allocated for that. It takes time, right? Bearings, I can get them straight from the vendor, but can I cross-reference them? Can I get them from auto parts stores? Is there other ways, other part numbers? It's the same exact bearing, just made by different companies. Are there ways to optimize that? And then another one piece I want to hit real quick is work requests. You can prioritize work requests in Limble, which I thought was fantastic because that gave my, again, I had a tight relationship with my food quality, food safety guy, and I wanted to make sure that his stuff hit the top of my list every day because if it came in from him, I knew that it was critical. That was a critical task, not a critical asset. And so you can organize that criticality so that way it's always hitting right at the top of my to-do list for the day, and it's always right in front of me or right in front of the technicians as well. So I hope I answered that well for you.
And again, yeah, that's part of that crawl, walk, run, right? If I don't have a list of any assets and I'm just jumping into the CMMS world, that's exactly what we start you out with. All right, let's get your locations and the critical spares under each location. As few or as many of those as you have to start with, and that usually gets you lifted off the ground. So I love that. Good job, Matt.
Yep. And then right with your other question right behind there, as far as recording failure modes, you can create as many custom fields as you want, and you can label them whatever you want them to be. And so, and you can decide how you want that to look in front of your technician. They can have as much access as you want them to. And I think this plays into a few of the other questions as well. You can give them as much access as you want, or you can take away as much access as you want, depending on each person individually. And so you can record as much data as you want. You could have a field labeled failure mode. And if there's certain references that you want to with the ISO standard, I'm sure that you can come in and you can make a field be what you want it to be to capture that critical data. And then speaking to the backside of it, this would be something I'd have to fiddle with, but like I used to do this with odometers, hour meters. I had a PM that all it was, you punched in that number, and then once that number populated, then it would actually create a separate PM from there. So that would be something I'd have to fiddle with and turn it over to the tech side as far as failure modes beyond that. But I think that you could probably get some questions answered. Test it, try it, see if it works.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, it looks like we're at time. I know there are a handful of questions that we didn't get to, but we'd love to follow up after the event. And I just want to say thank you so much to Matt and Skylar for all of your insights, and everyone here on the call for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.